Welcome back to She Can, where women lead by example by telling their stories of how they got to where they are today, to be role models to others, support others, and guide others, because it's easier to be what you can see. And I'm really excited to talk to a friend today, Elizabeth Bing. Welcome to She Can. You are a literary agent at Peters, Fraser, and Dunlop. You're a native New Yorker who started working in this field in the US in the editorial department of the Oxford University Press and later on Alfred Knopf, a division of Random House. And then you joined the Elaine Markson Literary Agency, and with them you moved to London, which is where you are now. And later on, you moved to William Morris Endeavour Agency, and in 2017, you joined Peters, Fraser, and Dunlop. You have worked with very big authors from Malcolm Gladwell to Arianna Huffington, Curtis Sittenfeld, Judy Blume, and many other award-winning writers. You sat on the creative council of the Aspen Institute Summer Words Festival. You've served on the faculty of the Breadloaf's Writers Conference in Middlebury, Vermont, and you've been a speaker at the Exeter University's MFA writing program at Trinity College in Dublin. Elizabeth, tell us a bit more about your journey and how you got to where you are today.
Well, first of all, Stephanie, thank you so much for hosting me. And it's a privilege and an honor to speak to your audience. I have real admiration for what you're doing in trying to unite women's voices and women's experiences to be ostensibly role models, but also to be friends, supporters, and part of the general circle of conversation that we all need to keep having across generations, I think, especially right now, as we define where we want to be in the world and on the planet, and define the kind of work that makes our life feel meaningful, not just as a career and a profession, which obviously, involves needing to earn a living and support a family, but I think in terms of giving us a sense of purpose. And so I would say that's a starting point for how I came into what I'm doing now and have been doing for 30 years.
Elizabeth, thank you for so eloquently saying this. Tell us a bit more about the moment when you realized, I don't know what the first moment was. Was it that you understood, I really love reading? Where did this passion start and that led to your purpose?
Well, I have to be honest without being sentimental, but when I was in third grade growing up in America, in Washington, D.C., I discovered a love of writing short stories because I could use my imagination and could go a little bit off piste and write slightly crazy things. I'd always loved reading from a young age, but something about the writing brought those two passions together. And once I got to, later on in high school, I was involved as an editor of the school literary magazine, helping to curate poems and short stories written by my peers. But I was very fortunate to have one of those transformative experiences at age 16 with an amazing English teacher who he was almost more like a college professor. And Robert Thomason was his name. And he invited me to join a kind of smaller seminar of students reading Latin American literature, which was completely new to me. At this point in the 80s, it was, reading Beowulf and reading kind of dead white men, mostly English, and, wonderful poetry and prose from that time. But something about reading, for example, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, or Borges' The Labyrinth, or Octavio Paz. It felt like I'd been living my life in black and white, and suddenly I was living in color. It was like this incredible world of different cultures, different voices, and it was so exciting to me and so transporting that this kind of writing could take me to those worlds, that I believe a little switch went off then, which told me intuitively that I had to do something involving literature in my life, even if I didn't know exactly what that was. But by the time I got to university, and I studied at Columbia University in New York, that path was very clear. So I pursued a degree in English literature, which took me to philosophy, to poetry. And even though my focus was on English literature, and that was my degree, um, I wanted to emphasize, particularly because from a transatlantic international point of view, um, those those cross-cultural conversations, even amongst disciplines, um, being sort of nimble in reading and writing helps connect the dots between philosophy, religion, classics. So whatever dimension of the humanities might interest you doesn't have to just be English literature to get into a career that might involve reading and writing. So I just wanted to mention that in the first instance. That although my chart was a little bit more predictable, going from English major to graduate school to being an editor to being an agent, there are many ways into the publishing world if you love the written word and you love to communicate.
Yeah. Elizabeth, so what does it take to be a literary agent? There must be so many components to this.
Well, it's funny. People used to say, "What is a literary agent?" And speaking candidly, I used to say, mother, shrink, friend, business person, psychologist,"
Exactly.
because because as an agent, I think what's different from being a book editor, and I'll speak to that in a moment. While a book editor is the person who acquires a book and a book deal, usually from an agent,
Mm.
and shepherds that process through the publishing house, from the editing on the page to the cover design to the marketing and sales to the execution of the project until its fruition when it reaches a bookstore or an audience. Um, a literary agent is, I would describe it as more of a midwife because one is involved very early in the process,
Mm.
usually from the inception of what may be just an idea described over a cup of tea. I want to write a book about X, or I want to write a novel about Y. And it involves helping to shape and form and structure that idea into either a book proposal, if it's a work of nonfiction,
Mhm.
or a full manuscript with editorial feedback if it's a novel. And so the role involved involves a kind of ongoing loyalty to the author through the kind of the evolution of their idea, not only to a book deal, which then involves taking the project and presenting it to a number of publishers to basically be a matchmaker, and then to negotiate the best possible financial deal, which involves some legal input and contractual expertise, to then being the custodian of that writer, that artist, over the course of perhaps not just that one book, but their career. So there are a number of writers I've worked with for literally 20 years, or people who might say, I've written a novel, now I want to write a memoir. And so you're really with them along for that journey. Whereas an editor is usually might be more connected to the author on a case by case basis, or the author may even move from one publishing house to another. And so being an agent is, yeah, you're really a companion on that journey, and also trying to help them grow and help create the best possible both business and creative opportunities for their talent.
Elizabeth, I'm so inspired and impressed because what an incredible companionship that must be when you're part of the creative and business process of great thinkers. What do you feel are your main takeaways or learnings or lessons that over the last 30 years of doing that, of being that
Well, first of
companion?
all, first of all, I'd like to just say again, I feel real gratitude and appreciation for the sheer range of projects that I get to work on, because most literary agents, and I just want to make this clear, don't tend to specialize in one kind of book. I mean, there are that may do, for example, romance or science, but one of the luxuries of being a literary agent is that one is allowed to be a bit of a dilettante. So I
Mm.
represent everybody from architects to scientists to historians to journalists to mindfulness coaches to cultural historians,
Yeah.
and so I think to poets, and so I think that variety is constantly a source of stimulation stimulation and inspiration. I'm learning something new all the time
Yeah.
by virtue of exposure to these authors. And so the secondary kind of lesson that I take away from that is I would distill into saying always have an open mind. And that doesn't mean compromising standard in terms of the quality. But I think one needs to be a good listener.
Yeah.
One needs to give an artist or a creative person the opportunity to honor and trust their process. And one of the things I treasure about my work also is there's no part of me that thinks, oh, I could do that. I could write that book. You could sit here and say, I want to write a novel about a pirate and he goes to Spain and he discovers a treasure. And I think, wow, and I might have some good editorial ideas to shape it. But then you deliver this book to me 6 months later, 9 months later, to keep to the midwife analogy. And I think, oh my God, look, she did this. She created this thing. And I love that otherness because there's no part of me that feels I could write the actual book.
Yeah.
I play a very different role. And I think listening, number one, is a good part of that. I think managing expectations is also very important. I think, especially as the market changes and the economy, I would say, since I began my career, I've really had to weather the storms of moments when publishing was good and bullish and moments when advances were lower. And there are these kind of ups and downs. And I think almost like being a parent, there is some degree of hand-holding and calm that is required to help people sustain the unpredictability of the business that we are in. And I would say on the outward side, another very big part of this work is long-term relationships with editors. For example, the London Book Fair is coming up next week, and I'm going to have the joy of having a lunch or a dinner or a meeting with people who I kind of grew up with in this business. And, they're now running HarperCollins or they're running Scribner. And those long-term relationships, which are forged on a mutual love of ideas, is, I think, a lesson for any profession that one wants to get involved in, that having a real, an inspiring and warm sense of connection with your peers and the people who are in this community. I think community building in any work that you do is very important in terms of making it feel meaningful. And it's also, of course, a crucial part of business, so that I think, oh, Stephanie's book about the Mexican pirate. Okay, I know someone who's going to like that. I'm going to call him up and send it to him. Yeah. So those things, if that makes sense, that sort of plays into the fabric of what
Absolutely, that makes total sense. Elizabeth, you've been talking about two things that I'm interested in. A, how do you lead? How do you lead? What kind of a leader are you? You have a real leadership position in guiding and championing and being part of this incredible journey of great thinkers bringing ideas onto paper. What kind of a leader do you feel you are?
Well, it's funny. Thank you. I don't tend to think of myself as a leader because while I may tend to be playing the role of being a thought leader in some way, I don't think of my day-to-day life in a leadership role, because I'm not running a company and doing a huge amount of management. Even though I've managed, smaller teams, my work tends to be more one-on-one with the writers and with the editors. So I'm just taking a pause because I don't think of leadership. I would say, but I would say,
if you think of it this way, at Sheinkman, we love to think of it differently, because everybody is a leader, and you lead by example for yourself, for your children, your family, your work. That we all lead with our story and our insights and our experiences, And everything that you've acquired throughout of your career, these are all things that you bring to the table. And this is how you lead in supporting the writers that you work with. So what are the things that are important to you
I
in
think that
terms
helps
of,
make it easier.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
that
relatable.
helps. When you frame it that way, when you frame it that way, Stephanie, it's easier for me to identify. I would define leadership as being led by my instincts,
Yeah, yeah.
and by my heart.
Mm,
And those two things, I cannot emphasize enough to young people. And I would also like to say, particularly to women, because I think we're pulled in a lot of different directions, wearing a lot of different hats, whether it's business, whether it's family, whether it's as spouses. And it is an ongoing challenge to often drown out what society is saying you could or should do and really listen to what you know in your heart is is where you need to go. And I think it takes a long time, maybe a lifetime, to trust that. And I would say there are times earlier in my 20s or earlier in my career where I felt like I was leading more with my head in a
mm,
cerebral way,
mm.
because I've been trained that way and I'm a
Yeah,
word person.
yeah.
And that maybe in doing that, I probably drowned out a little bit more of the heart and the instinct.
Mm,
And they're, both are so important, but they have to work in a balance, in a
yeah,
yin and the yang. And
yeah.
so I'd like to say that I'm being led by instinct. And what I mean by instinct, I don't mean, oh, which way the wind blows in terms of how I, make a decision on whether to take on something, but um, to to be attentive to whatever is telling me that something is meaningful,
Mm,
and something is interesting, and even if the world may not agree at the time or the market might not agree at the time, and there has to be some risk taking involved, number one,
yeah,
as in any business.
yeah.
But number two, I think um, putting your ego aside
Mm,
is really important. And I think to be a good leader in terms of what we impart to those we love or to our colleagues, or even in a more technical leadership role, one has to step aside from one's own um, kind of baggage, or to be a vessel. And so I feel I'm a better leader when I'm listening and letting the things flow through me that I need to transmit, and that there's an integrity to how I can support people, um, and how I can earn their trust, and vice versa. If I get out of my own way, if that makes some
yeah,
sense, and it's not
yeah,
about success or failure, because you might have a great deal and a great bestseller, and that's wonderful, but then on to the next one. Just
mm,
not to be too attached to there are going to be the good days and the bad days, and there's, by the way, a lot of rejection in my
yes.
profession, a lot,
Mm,
right? So from the outside, the optics are, you might see, oh, and there's this bestseller or this big book dealer. That's all great. But for every one of those, there are many, many rejections, many,
mm,
many books where the publishers don't offer, or many, many opportunities that, a book may have happened and it might not. And so I think one has to commit to that journey and the twists and turns. And I think that applies to a lot of things. But I would say, um, if one's ego is not too involved and attached, it can roll off you more easily. And that's, I think, important.
yeah, I agree. Elizabeth, what would you feel after 30 years? What do you still see as your challenges and how do you reframe them? And is that all these rejections, is that potentially flowing into that?
Yes, I think, again, it's very important not to take, when I care deeply about an author and their book,
Mm,
it's sometimes hard not to take it personally if the editor doesn't like it or want it. It's like, if your child doesn't get chosen for the team, or, you have
yeah,
to kind of create a healthy separation. Um, I think the other challenges, as I'm older and at a different stage of life, have to do with bandwidth and time management and boundaries.
Mm,
Um, and I think these things are, again, part of the metric of any business at any point. But I would be dishonest if I didn't say that, when I was younger in my 20s and I wasn't married and didn't have children,
yeah.
um, that it felt like I had much more time to read manuscripts, much more time to be involved. And so in the marshaling of time and efficiency, that is something that can be challenging. And so trying to find a balance. Although I'm sitting here looking on my desk at this little card that someone gave me that says, there is no such thing as work-life balance. Everything worth fighting for unbalances your life. So it's got to fall somewhere in between there.
Yeah,
But that is an ongoing challenge for many of us. I know.
for
I
sure.
know.
Elizabeth, what are you most proud of?
I am, and it's funny because people say in all the books you've represented, what's your favorite author? What's your favorite book? And I'm not going to answer that question. I am most proud of being able to help shepherd books into the world that can help people,
Mm,
that can bring joy, that can bring whether it's joy in the form of escape,
yeah.
whether it's transformation,
Mm,
whether it's inspiration, whether it is knowledge that leads to a perspective that breeds compassion. Um, and so, again, when I say not thinking of a leader, I like to think of myself more behind the scenes,
yeah.
but quietly, you know, sending out, whether in big or small ways, these gems into the world that will be received. And nothing makes me more happy and proud when, um, I hear that someone gave that book to someone as a gift and it helped them through that time. Or, I mean, it just, that is what it's not about one particular book, but just being a part of that river is very joyful for me. And
Yeah.
I'm very proud of that.
Beautiful. Elizabeth, so what are your plans and goals? Dreams. What is your vision going forward?
Um, I would well, so I would like to continue playing that role to the best of my ability for as long as I can. um, Even if it might take on different contours as I get older and I may not be doing exactly what I'm doing as a day job, for the next 20 years. I think it's fair to say I always want to be um, connected to um, a community that is in some way sharing ideas
Mm,
and conversations,
mm,
um, so that that I and we are constantly learning. I don't think there's an I think it's we. There has to be a we. Um, and I feel if there might be a way to, fantasy or a dream you asked is like, it would be exciting to me to organize maybe a writer's retreat or a workshop or something that is a curated gathering of people coming together maybe on one theme.
mm.
um, I think that would be really fun and inspiring. And as we enter an age where the notion of content transcends just the book. And obviously, my life and my career has been committed to the written book, and I
Yeah.
still believe people love the book. We've all witnessed, there. So I'm not necessarily wedded to only the book going forward, and maybe I'll learn some new tricks along the way, despite being a technophobe.
I love it. Elizabeth, what would you like our listeners to take away from your story?
Um, I think I would like to transmit Um, Going back again to the theme of trusting one's instinct and believing, I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but really believing in yourself that you know what you know deep down, to listen to that. Number one, to always ask questions and always try to put yourself in the position of the other person that you are dealing with in a business context or a personal context, and that will give you a level of calm that can get you through the more challenging moments that any business transactions bring. And then I think I might say patience. And that's the hard one. I'm a very impatient person.
Me too.
Patience. And what I mean is not stoic patience, but I mean patience which is tied to good faith, which has to do with believing, or actually I'm gonna quote John Keats, who has a wonderful quote, the poet John Keats, who said, "One must have negative capability, and that is the ability to exist in mystery, uncertainty, and doubt without irritable reaching after fact and reason." Mystery, uncertainty, and doubt without irritable reaching after fact and reason. And what that means is one has to embrace these gray area times when things aren't resolved and you can't see around the corner and it's dark and you don't see the light, and just lean into that, because it's not all tidy. It's not all connecting the dots, and the road is not linear, and it's circular. And when I look back and I think of the more challenging times, I think, God, if I could have just taken my foot a little off the accelerator, to have just been more patient and trusted that things would unfold the way they needed to, instead of getting myself so wound up about things I couldn't control. And it's good to have ambition. It's good to have goals. It's points on the horizon that you're aiming to. But at the same time, it just doesn't always happen the way you think it's going to. And it doesn't happen overnight.
Elizabeth, what you just said is a beautiful way to finish this, because it's so timely. As we know, there are many things transforming in our world order right now. We see a lot of role models leading by example in a way that we don't really appreciate and don't want to see. And so I feel that maybe this pause, or these sacred pauses that you're talking about, which we call patience. So maybe we need to lean back a little bit, while not going away from action, or having a very clear purpose and how we want to make a difference, but just not attaching to the everyday events that are driving us a little crazy right now.
Yes, I think there's a very important distinction to be made between being patient and being passive.
Yeah.
Being patient is a form of strength. It is literally comes from gravity. It comes from strength.
Yeah.
And being passive is different. It's being unmoored.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, I think, as you said, in these times, it's very important, because in being patient, we are also quietly collecting information and listening. Listening is a very active thing, active listening.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a nuanced but vital combination.
Yeah.
For our survival that we're fighting for in the world right now, truly.
Yeah. Yeah. Elizabeth.
And I think women, I'm going to end on one note, I think women have this quality.
Inherently.
Often,
Yes.
very, very much. I see it across the board, across generations.
Yeah.
Because they have to. They have to wear different hats. And some things are blooming over here and some things are tending over there, and it's not all always happening at once. And that the Gaia goddess, with all the arms, that is that is part of what we're talking about.
This is part of what we're talking about. And I feel it's a moment where we need to collaborate to accelerate. And that means collaboration, women to women. Women need to support other women. And we need to have allies, women and men, in collaboration to accelerate an action that we feel is what is needed.
Absolutely.
Elizabeth,
Absolutely.
my last question would be, if you had a postcard that you could send to everybody in the world with one sentence, what would that sentence be?
Oh my God, Stephanie, that is so hard. Well, I wouldn't say the negative capability thing because it just gets a little too wordy. I would say a postcard to everybody in the world.
Yeah, if you could send literally 7 billion postcards with one sentence that everybody would receive, what would be on there? For me, it
Maybe
is you're here for a reason, because I really believe in that.
I would say, and I'm not, I'm not a priest or, a spiritual leader. I would say I would try to do a little bit of a haiku that would say, love more, listen
Mm,
more,
mm,
breathe more
mm. Beautiful.
together.
Yeah. What a beautiful note to end on, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. What a beautiful, inspiring conversation this was.
Thank you so much for having me. And I love what you're doing. And I wish everybody luck on their journey.